We have hundreds of billions of dollars pouring into our country now. We should have done this many years ago.
The president says the U.S. will pay down its debt.
And there could be a distribution or dividend to the people of our country. I would say for people that would be middle-income people and lower-income people, we could do a dividend.
President Trump also addressed drug prices, saying his recent moves to lower them.
Daniel Lakai, a chief economist at Tresses and author of the book Freedom or Equality. Daniel, always great to see you. So what are your thoughts, on hearing that some Americans could get dividends, your initial reactions?
Well, obviously it makes sense if the public accounts are in order. I think that the most pressing issue right now is the extraordinary level of the government deficit. No? And the Trump administration is taking action to reduce the deficit, to reduce government spending, to make the public accounts more sustainable, and that's the first element that needs to be addressed. Once that is addressed, and once we have, according to the latest estimates, we're talking about $7 trillion of tariff revenues throughout the next 10 years. Then we can certainly discuss about the options of reducing the tax burden and obviously giving back part to the American consumer. It obviously makes sense. But certainly it's first eliminating, well, not eliminating, it's basically bringing the deficit to a sustainable level, bringing debt down, reducing government spending, and then giving back part to citizens.
Okay, do you see tariffs as a stable source of government revenue generation?
Well, it's interesting that you asked this question, because in the heated debate about tariffs, I read the other day that the European Union collected more than 28 billion euro of tariffs in the last 3 months. No? And that the European Union considers this as a key element of maintaining the fiscal stability of the Union. No? So of course it is. It's like any other source of revenue for the government. But I think that what we need to understand is that tariffs have been implemented in order to provide a better environment for trade, and that it's going to be the combination not only of tariff revenues, but higher exports and lower imports. All of those things are beneficial for the U.S. economy.
Okay, let's say the first priority is taking care of, as you mentioned earlier, reducing the federal deficit of national debt, and then reducing federal spending, and then we still have money left over with these tariffs, revenue from the tariffs, and we give them to consumers. Let me ask you this question. So American importers pay for these tariffs, right? And then the revenue is given to someone else. Does this look like wealth redistribution?
Not really. American importers don't pay for the tariffs. We have seen so far, and it's now pretty evident in the inflation figures, that it's mostly the exporters and throughout the supply chain, the different elements that have overcapacity that pay for the tariffs. If there's any evidence actually of what importers are doing, is that most large importers from Whole Foods to Costco to Walmart, etc., they're actually not paying for the tariff. The second is that obviously tariffs are an element of government fiscal planning. So if the government wants to provide a certain element of relief to certain brackets of the fiscal side, that's obviously their prerogative, and they can use those revenues the same way that they can use, for example, the revenues from royalties from oil extraction or royalties from natural gas extraction. Royalties from oil extraction are paid by the exploration and production companies, and those royalties are used then to provide for services or any other type of benefit for the U.S. citizens. So obviously it is part of fiscal planning like any other.
Okay, can you elaborate on what you said at this one point that exporters pay these tariffs? So if I'm a company in China and I'm exporting to the United States, I have to pay the United States to send my product to the US.
Exactly. What we have seen, and there's 29 billion in July of revenues collected from tariffs, is that they're paid by the exporters. Furthermore, think about this. A lot of people say that tariffs cause inflation and that tariffs increase prices. But that makes absolutely no sense. Costs do not dictate final prices. The imputation principle coming from Karl Menger, as is a very well-known principle in economics, shows that costs don't drive final prices. It's final prices what drives costs. And one of the things that we know as well is that tariffs don't create more units of currency in the system. Therefore, they don't cause inflation. So in the debate these days, I hear a lot of times people talking about tariffs from the following principle: exporter, importer. No? Like as if the supply chain was created by two links. But it's not true. It is exporter, distributor, transport, storage, all different elements of the chain. And what's most interesting, and you know this very well because we have discussed it a few times, is that most exporters have overcapacity and working capital challenges. Therefore, for them, it is better to absorb the cost of the tariff in order to sell more and better to the United States, which is the largest and richest economy. That's why inflation and inflation expectations are not rising, because those tariffs are being gradually shared among the parts in which there's more overcapacity in the supply chain.
Okay, on the topic of inflation, I had another thought. I remember during the pandemic, right, we saw how the government was sending paychecks to households. Would this be the same thing if the government is sending dividends to households?
No, very different. In the pandemic, the government was sending paychecks to households coming from what? From issuing new currency, and i.e. printing money, and increasing debt. Okay? This is the opposite. This is, you are receiving revenues, okay, coming from abroad, and those revenues are then distributed to households. So it would be the opposite. It would be not a policy of printing money to give a paycheck, but a policy of not printing money and receiving higher revenues that then are maybe utilized as a paycheck. It's a big difference, because the first one means more units of currency in the system, and that obviously was part of what created the element of inflation that we have seen in the past years. And we have to remind people that inflation is not rising prices. Inflation is the loss of purchasing power of the currency. Rising prices is a consequence of inflation, is not inflation. So with the distribution of part of the revenues coming from tariffs to citizens, you would not be creating new units of currency, you would not be printing money, and certainly not increasing the debt, actually decreasing it. Therefore, it doesn't create inflation.
Okay, here's another question that I have. If the government starts handing out checks to households, and these are funded by tariffs, and these households, they are voters, right? Would that give the U.S. government an incentive to keep tariffs higher, maybe?
That's a dangerous, yeah, it can, but it's a dangerous way of looking at it, because if you think about it, we all understand that we need to have some taxes, okay, in order for the government and society to function within a state, okay? We all understand that. However, we all understand that very high taxes for a prolonged period of time, even worse, are going to be detrimental for growth and for the economy. Tariffs are a tool to basically level the playing field in the trading of the United States with its partners. Leveling the playing field is one thing. Another completely different thing is going into a protectionist Monroean type of position relative to tariffs, which would have the same negative effect as having very high taxes. We understand that having an attractive level of taxation for companies and for citizens is something that helps provide good services and at the same time is not negative for economic growth. However, if you constantly increase taxes, that would be detrimental. The same with tariffs. If you use tariffs as they have been used as a negotiation tool to level the playing field, that is positive and is also generating higher revenue. But if you go and then just continually increase tariffs, then it does have a negative economic effect.
Okay, just one last question, Daniel. You said earlier that there's a big difference between sending paychecks to households like during the pandemic and compared to what Trump is suggesting now, giving a cut of the tariff revenue to households. It doesn't increase inflation. Does it stimulate the economy?
It may. Obviously, these types of policies, we also have to understand that if you provide a check to households, part of it may be saved, part of it may be spent. The impact obviously is limited, but exists. So obviously, it could create some level of support to economic growth, but it's not something that is likely to be, let's say, prolonged and sustainable. It's a boost, but it's not, it's not a permanent policy.
Well, okay, Daniel, it's great to see you again this week. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Don. Have a good weekend.
You too. President Trump says he deployed